I was betrayed, and in the separation my wife took everything from me. I never imagined that my life could change so drastically in such a short span of time. I was a man who believed in the sanctity of marriage, who trusted his partner implicitly. For years, I had thought that we were building something beautiful together. A life, a family, a future. But all that came crashing down one fateful evening when I discovered the truth. My wife, the woman I had loved and cherished, had betrayed me in the most devastating way imaginable. The irony is, I still remember the night we met like it was yesterday. It was at a friend's party, and we instantly clicked. We spent hours talking, and from that moment on, I was convinced she was the one. Fast forward 15 years, and I'm sitting in an empty house, wondering how it all went so wrong. But perhaps the most painful part of the story isn't just the betrayal itself, but what followed after. The separation where she took everything from me, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. You might be curious to know what exactly happened, how a seemingly perfect life could unravel so quickly. The details are messy and painful, but they need to be told. It's a story of trust broken, of love lost, and of the struggle to rebuild from the ground up. And it all began with one simple, heart-wrenching discovery. Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when things started to go wrong. We had a strong bond, or so I thought. We met in our late 20s, both established in our careers, both eager to start a life together. Our wedding was a beautiful affair, filled with laughter, love, and the promise of a future we were eager to build. We bought a house, traveled, and dreamed of starting a family. Everything seemed perfect. Our life together was full of the usual ups and downs, but nothing ever felt insurmountable. We celebrated anniversaries, supported each other through career changes, and navigated the ordinary challenges of life as a team. Friends often remarked on how we seemed to complement each other so well, how we were always in sync. I believed we had a rock-solid foundation. However, there were subtle signs that I now realize I ignored. Little things that seemed insignificant at the time. A missed dinner date, secretive phone calls, a sudden interest in working late. I brushed them off, convinced that we were simply going through a rough patch, that it was a phase every couple experiences. I trusted her completely and never imagined that beneath the surface, something much darker was brewing. It was a rainy Wednesday evening when my world began to collapse. I remember it vividly because I came home earlier than usual, drenched from the unexpected downpour. The house was unusually quiet, save for the faint murmur of voices coming from the living room. As I approached, I heard her speaking in hushed tones, the kind that immediately made my stomach churn with a sense of foreboding. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stood outside the door, listening. The conversation was intimate, filled with laughter and phrases that sounded too personal, too loving. My heart pounded as the reality of the situation began to sink in. I barged into the room, catching her off guard. She fumbled with her phone, but it was too late. The look on her face, a mix of shock and guilt, confirmed my worst fears. The confrontation was chaotic. I demanded to know who she was talking to, but her evasive answers only fueled my anger. Eventually, she admitted it. She had been seeing someone else for months. The admission felt like a dagger to the heart. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly lost. The life I thought I knew was a lie, and the person I trusted most had deceived me in the most profound way. The confrontation was nothing short of a nightmare. My mind was reeling, trying to process the words she had just said. Seeing someone else for months. It echoed in my head, a haunting refrain that seemed impossible to accept. I demanded to know everything, how it started, who he was, and why she did it. She tried to explain, to justify her actions, but her words were a blur, drowned out by the surge of emotions coursing through me. We shouted, we cried, and at some point, I remember the neighbors knocking on the door, concerned about the commotion. She admitted that it began innocently, as a friendship with a colleague, but it had quickly escalated into something more. Each detail felt like another betrayal, each word a nail in the coffin of our marriage. She tried to apologize, saying she never meant to hurt me, but it was too late. The damage was done, and trust was irrevocably shattered. The rest of the evening was a haze. I stormed out of the house, needing to escape the suffocating reality. I drove aimlessly, my mind a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and confusion. When I finally returned home, it was clear that things would never be the same. We slept in separate rooms that night, a physical manifestation of the emotional chasm that had opened between us. In the days that followed, I was a shell of my former self. Each morning I woke up hoping it was all just a terrible dream, but reality hit hard every time I saw the empty side of the bed. My emotions swung wildly, from blind rage to numbing sorrow. I couldn't concentrate at work and took several days off to try and collect myself, but solitude only intensified the pain. I confided in a few close friends, seeking solace and advice. Their support was unwavering, yet nothing they said could mend the gaping wound in my heart. My family, too, was devastated by the news. They had always seen us as the perfect couple and struggled to understand how things had unraveled so quickly. My parents, especially, were a rock during those dark days, offering a safe space for me to vent my frustrations and fears. Despite their support, I felt profoundly alone. The betrayal had created a rift not just in my marriage but in my very sense of self. Trusting someone so completely, only to have them betray you, shakes you to the core. I knew I had to make a decision about our future, but the thought of separation, of completely appending my life, was overwhelming. Yet, staying in a marriage devoid of trust and honesty felt equally impossible. After days of agonizing over what to do, I realized that staying together was not an option. The betrayal had severed the bond between us in a way that could never be fully repaired. One evening, we sat down to talk, both of us exhausted from the emotional turmoil. The conversation was somber and filled with a sense of finality. I told her I couldn't continue living a lie, that the trust and respect that formed the foundation of our relationship were gone. She didn't fight it. In fact, there was a strange sense of relief in her eyes, as if she had been expecting this outcome. We discussed the logistics of separating, trying to remain as civil as possible despite the underlying tension. We agreed it was best to part ways, though the reality of what that meant was daunting. I had no idea how to begin disentangling our lives, our finances, our shared dreams. The decision to separate was the first step in a long, painful process. We contacted lawyers to start the legal proceedings, and the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. There were countless details to sort out, from dividing our assets to deciding who would keep the house. Every step felt like a reminder of the life we had built together and were now dismantling piece by piece. Hiring a lawyer was a necessity, but it also felt like admitting defeat. I met with a well-recommended attorney who laid out the complexities of the divorce process. The paperwork, the court dates, the negotiations, it all seemed overwhelming. I wanted it to be over as quickly as possible, but my lawyer warned me that these things often take time, especially when significant assets are involved. Our first court meeting was surreal. Sitting across from her, now represented by her own lawyer, felt like staring at a stranger. The discussions were clinical and detached, a stark contrast to the passionate arguments we once had. We went through the motions of dividing our assets, each decision a painful reminder of what we were losing. The house, the car, the savings, everything was meticulously divided, but it felt like she was getting the better end of the deal. It became clear that she had prepared for this. Her lawyer was aggressive, pushing for terms that left me with less than I had expected. The realization that she had not only betrayed me emotionally, but had also strategically positioned herself to take more during the separation was devastating. Despite my lawyer's best efforts, the legal proceedings dragged on, each day bringing new frustrations and heartaches. As the legal battle unfolded, it became increasingly evident that my wife was determined to leave me with as little as possible. We had accumulated a considerable amount of assets over the years, and each one became a point of contention. The house, our most significant asset, was her primary target. She argued that she needed it more than I did, given her claim that it provided stability. I couldn't help but feel the sting of irony. Stability, after she had destabilized our entire life together. The process was grueling. The lawyers went back and forth, haggling over every detail. She secured the house, citing her need to maintain her standard of living. The car, which I had considered mine, was also awarded to her. My savings, intended for our future, were split in a way that left me with a fraction of what I had worked so hard to earn. It seemed that every time I thought I could keep something, it slipped through my fingers. The hardest part was seeing my life's work and dreams being reduced to numbers and negotiations. Each asset represented a piece of our shared history, and now it felt like I was losing not just my possessions, but the very memories attached to them. My lawyer tried to assure me that we were getting a fair deal, but fairness felt like a hollow concept when the outcome was so devastating. In the end, she walked away with the lion's share, leaving me to start over with little more than the clothes on my back. The emotional toll was immense. Each day, I woke up feeling like I was living someone else's nightmare. The home I once found comfort in now felt like a hollow shell, filled with memories of happier times that only deepened my sense of loss. Nights were the hardest, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. I felt as though I had been gutted, my heart and spirit torn apart by the betrayal and the grueling separation process. Friends and family tried their best to support me, but I often found it hard to even articulate what I was feeling. I sank into a deep depression, the kind that makes every day a struggle to get out of bed. Simple tasks felt monumental, and I was consumed by a sense of worthlessness. I questioned everything, my judgment, my worth, my ability to trust again. It was as if my entire identity had been stripped away, leaving behind a raw, aching void. In those dark moments, I tried to find solace in routine. I threw myself into work, hoping that burying myself in tasks would distract me from the pain. I started seeing a therapist, who helped me begin to untangle the complex web of emotions I was experiencing. It was a slow process, but gradually, I started to confront the feelings of anger, betrayal, and sadness that had been consuming me. The road to healing was long and arduous, but each small step forward felt like a victory. The impact of our separation rippled through my family, creating new tensions and altering old relationships. My parents were heartbroken, not only for me but for the loss of the daughter-in-law they had come to love. They struggled to understand how someone they had trusted so deeply could cause so much pain. Family gatherings became awkward and tense, with everyone tiptoeing around the subject, unsure of what to say. My siblings tried to support me in their own ways, but it wasn't always easy. My younger sister, who had always looked up to our marriage as a model, was particularly disillusioned. She expressed her anger and disappointment more openly than anyone else, unable to hide her sense of betrayal. Meanwhile, my older brother took a more pragmatic approach, focusing on practical solutions and urging me to move on and rebuild my life. Their intentions were good, but the varied approaches sometimes left me feeling pulled in different directions. Extended family members had their opinions too, and not all of them were sympathetic. Whispers of blame and judgment circulated, with some questioning how I could have been so blind. It was exhausting trying to navigate these dynamics while dealing with my own grief. Yet, in some ways, it also brought us closer. The ordeal revealed the depth of my family's love and support, even if they didn't always know the right words to say. We found strength in each other, and slowly, I began to feel less isolated in my pain. The day finally came when the legal proceedings were over, and I was left to rebuild my life from scratch. With little more than my clothes and a few personal belongings, I moved into a small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a fresh start. I had to furnish it, which was both daunting and liberating. For the first time in years, I made decisions solely based on my preferences, slowly reclaiming my sense of self. Starting over wasn't just about finding a new place to live. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of the marriage. I reconnected with old friends and hobbies that had fallen by the wayside. I threw myself into my work, not just as a distraction, but as a way to find purpose and stability. My colleagues, aware of my situation, offered support and understanding, making the office feel like a refuge. Therapy played a crucial role in this process. My therapist helped me confront the deep-seated issues that had surfaced during the separation, my shattered trust, my feelings of inadequacy, and my fear of the future. It was through this work that I began to see a path forward. I started setting small goals for myself like running a 5K and taking a cooking class. These activities, though seemingly minor, helped me regain confidence and joy in life. Slowly but surely, I was piecing my life back together, one day at a time. As I moved forward, I began to reflect on the lessons this painful journey had taught me. The most profound realization was about the nature of trust and vulnerability. I had given my trust completely, and while it had been shattered, I learned that trust should be built gradually and reciprocally. I also discovered the importance of self-reliance and independence. I had been so entwined in my marriage that I had lost sight of my individuality. Reclaiming that independence became a cornerstone of my healing process. I learned about resilience and the human capacity to endure and grow from suffering. Each setback, each moment of despair, became a stepping stone toward a stronger, more self-aware version of myself. I found that it was essential to forgive not necessarily her but myself. I forgave myself for the perceived failures, for the blindness to the red flags, and for the times I had let my pain dictate my actions. Another significant lesson was the value of support networks. My friends, family, and therapist had been instrumental in helping me navigate the darkest days. They reminded me that seeking help is not a sign of weakness but of strength. Their unwavering support taught me the power of empathy and human connection, reinforcing the importance of maintaining these relationships and being there for others in their times of need. Through these lessons, I began to rebuild my life, carrying forward the hard-earned wisdom from my experiences. As I moved forward, I began to reflect on the lessons this painful journey had taught me. The most profound realization was about the nature of trust and vulnerability. I had given my trust completely, and while it had been shattered, I learned that trust should be built gradually and reciprocally. I also discovered the importance of self-reliance and independence. I had been so entwined in my marriage that I had lost sight of my individuality. Reclaiming that independence became a cornerstone of my healing process.